so excited about this panel. Let me share my slides in here. Welcome to day one of RevEx Fest. We just finished the first panel with David Sachs and it was amazing. I am pretty sure this one is going to be fire too. Today's event and all the 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. We are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer the toughest revenue questions out there. That's why we have this brilliant panel in here to help us. If you're not a member yet, you are definitely missing out and you will be invited to join us after this summit. Now on to our amazing sponsors, because MSP does not work by alone. This summit would not be possible without our amazing sponsors who you see on this slide. Big thanks to them for making RevEx Fest happen. To learn more about these innovative companies, click on the sponsors booth tab at the top of this event page. And also, while you're there, you can check the full agenda. We have 26 events spread out in the 3-day summit. It's so many great people for you to hear from. And learn from them and take notes. But for now, let's focus on this session here and how to get the most out of it. The agenda for this session is I'm going to give some housekeeping notes. It's going to be pretty fast. And then I'm going to pass it to the speakers because I know you want to hear from them. And don't worry, they will have time to answer your questions. So please send us a lot of questions. We have a live Q&A in there. And use the chat a lot because we want to hear from you. While I'm talking, why don't you go into the chat and tell us where you're calling from? And for right now, that's all from me. I am going to pass it to Milena. Milena, you can take it from here. Milena is going to be our moderator. You can introduce yourself and then ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and we can start the conversation. Once you're done, just invite me back on the stage, and I will do the closing remarks, okay?
Okay, thank you so much, Eduardo. See ya. Hello, everybody. I am so excited for our RevEx Fest. It's going to be wonderful. And I want to thank you all for being here today. Of course, I want to give a special thanks to our illustrious speakers on this session, Mike, Emily, and Jeff. Just to orient everybody before we get started, we're going to go through a quick round of introductions. Then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of our panel, which is basically around, what happens when doo-doo hits the fan during high growth stages at companies. So it's going to be really fun. And then we're going to leave the last few minutes for Q&A. But of course, please don't be shy. Please participate in the chat. If there are some questions that pop up, like in the middle of the conversation, that's totally fine. Actually, that's encouraged. We will also acknowledge those questions in the middle of the panel. And of course, at the end, we'll have a time dedicated exclusively for Q&A. Perfect. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started with the round of intros. I can go ahead and get started. My name is Milena Call. I am the VP of Sales at Atrium. I am actually relatively new here. I've just been here for 3 months. I am saying hello to everybody from Atlanta. And before Atrium, I was leading one of the sales organizations at Flock Safety. And before that, I was leading sales teams at SalesLoft for 5 years. So it's really nice to meet all of you. All right. Well, with that being said, Mike, I want to hand it over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Kaufman. I'm VP of Sales at Spring Health. We're a mental health technology company that provides mental health benefits, coaching, therapy, digital exercises to employers to provide to their employees. Before that, I was at CB Insights, which was a market intelligence platform, and have been at various New York City tech companies through a lot of different growth.
Awesome. Yes, we're so happy to have you, Mike. Emily, what about you?
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm Emily Dresser, calling in from California. I'm currently the AVP of Sales for AVP of Commercial Sales for Heath, and previously I was at TripAction. So very excited to be here and talk with all of you.
Yes, we're equally excited, and thank you for joining us so early.
Love it.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Kang. I'm currently the Director of Revenue and the Head of Strategic Markets for a company called Weedmaps. We're an online marketplace for all things cannabis for dispensaries and consumers alike. I think Shopify meets Yelp all in cannabis space. And so I'm also calling from usually sunny LA, but today a little bit chilly and cloudy.
Yeah, I can see that in the background of your window. Well, thank you also for being up so early for our panel today.
Of course.
Great. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, I want to basically give our audience a little bit of context about the experiences that you guys have had from a high growth standpoint. So, I want to go around the room and I want to hear about, like, from a high level, a little list or bullet points of high growth experiences that you've had, right? So, for example, when I was at SalesLoft, I was employee number 80. This was in 2016. And then, like, 2 years later, we were over 500 employees. So there's a lot of stuff happening in that time, right? Say at Flock Safety, I was employee number 100, and then I left when we were nearly 600 people. That was a year later. So if all of us can go around the room and kind of give us that context, that macro context, that would be super helpful. So Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, of course. So I've got to be in different stages of high growth, either as an individual contributor all the way to senior leadership. Weedmaps is my third company that I've now seen gone public in my career, which has been very fortunate to do. I started off with a company called Protolabs, manufacturing space in a small town in Minnesota. Saw it got called public. I was employed under 100. By the time I left, we're about 2,000 people. Then moved over to Square, the credit card reader, where I helped build the enterprise sales team. Again, about employee number 400. I think today it's about 6,500 in total at Square. And then a couple startups in between. Was the second hire for a small company called Fictive. Got to grow their sales team to about 45 people in about 2 years, from pre-seed all the way to Series D. So I've seen a lot of experience where I finally have landed here at Weedmaps, leading a team of about 60 people for our most mature markets.
That's awesome. And then remind us, how long have you been at Weedmaps?
I've been here for about 2 years now.
Okay. And so how big was the sales team when you started, and how big is it now?
Yeah, we were about 30 people on the sales team, just alone my team. Today, we're about just over 60 with a few directors and managers. Total team today on the revenue org is about 130.
Oh my God. That's incredible. That's incredible. Congrats on the growth.
Thank you.
Awesome. Emily, what about you?
Yeah, so I've got two experiences I could pull from. So TripActions, I started as a mid-market rep, employee 130. I was there for a little over 2 years, went into a manager role. And when I left, the company was about 1,100 employees. So very fast growth. And then now Heap, I got to Heap a little over 200 employees, came in, there were just under 5 commercial reps. Today we've got 3 teams, we're 17 wide, and we're a little over 400 employees.
Wow. I mean, it's like when 2X is the lowest bar. It's crazy. Mike, what about you?
Sure. So the craziest growth I've experienced is at Spring. I've been with Spring Health for less than 1.5 years. And when I started, there was less than 100 employees, and now we're over 900. So it's been like nothing I've experienced before. The revenue org was about 10 people when I started, and well over 100 now. Before that, I was at CB Insights, which was interesting because we close to 10x our revenue in the 4 years I was there. And the sales, the company maybe went from 100 to 300 people. And the revenue org maybe tripled from 20 to around 60, but that was more bootstrapped. So very interesting to see the other side of it, but have experienced a lot of different revenue growths and different employee growths with that.
That's incredible. I can't believe the Spring Health growth. I mean, especially in such a short amount of time. My goodness.
Been wild.
Wow. Wild, to say the least. So Mike, you know what? Let's stick to that string for a second. From like going from fewer than 100 people a year and a half ago to almost 1,000, right? Tell us a little bit about like what was the most challenging aspect of leading your team through this kind of growth?
Yeah, I'd say the most challenging aspect is to like let go and understand everything's not going to be perfect. I mean, there's fire drills every day, and I really have forced myself to prioritize what's actually going to lead to revenue, what's really important right now, and what should I focus on. So while there's a million things I can do, there's challenges with implementation, there's challenges with hiring, there's challenges with onboarding, there's challenges with deals and rules and all of that. It's like, what are the things really getting in the way from us executing? And understanding where at CB Insights I had a little more space to make everything perfect, understanding that if something's 80% good, you got to let go of the like perfectionist attitude and get it there. And you also have to delegate it a ton.
Well, so if at CB Insights 80% was good enough, what was that percentage? What is that percentage at Spring Health?
Yeah, I would say at CB Insights, I could get things really good, like 90 or 100%. At Spring, I'd say if something's good enough, if our proposal doc is good enough, let's ship it and move on to something else and get feedback. We have to move quicker, so we need to get internal feedback quicker, all of that. It's about speed and execution in a way that I've never experienced before, because every month it feels like it's a different company. And there's also so many new internal stakeholders that are getting ramped up. And so it just leads to, you got to embrace the chaos and accept it and know that if there's a process today, it's probably going to change in a month.
Most definitely will change in a month. So it's like, you know what, this is like 71% good enough. Like, we're going to just go with it. This is version 1.0. Like, it'll get better probably next week, but we need to just go right now.
Exactly. And the other thing, it's amazing how people will step up. Like, people on my team that were AEs less than a year ago, not only are they in leadership positions, but they take on projects to help with things that are really impactful for the company, because you just can't do everything. And so when you find talented, hungry people that want to take on more, it's amazing what people can accomplish if you just give them the room to do it.
You know, this is really interesting. I'd actually love to hear maybe a story about, or an example of a project that needed to be done, but there's nobody with the title to do project XYZ. But a rep was like, you know what, like, I need this right now. We all need this right now. I'm just going to do it. This is not part of my job or like my job description, but it needs to be done. So let's do it. Can you think of like an example where you're like, wow, that was dope. I really like that needed to be done, and they just stepped up.
Yeah, I was blown away. So we've had challenges with implementation because customers are coming on quicker than we can imagine. And we also learning from each one what customers expect, what can be standardized, what can't. And I'm dealing with hiring and onboarding and getting through legal and procurement and forecasting and all of that implementation is really important. It's just not my priority once the contract is signed, but it was causing a ton of bottlenecks. And so somebody on my team that was an AE just took it on really from start to finish of like, this is the process of what happens when a customer signs. This is what we expect of how many customers we're going to close. So this is the amount of implementation managers we need. This is what it looks externally, internally. And it's amazing that they built something out that has such an impact for somebody that doesn't have a ton of experience. But again, I couldn't take that on, and I couldn't have done as good of a job as she could have anyways. And it was a lifesaver, and you have to be able to trust and delegate like that.
Oh, I love that. Good for her. That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mike. And Jeff, what about you? What are some of the most like memorable challenges that you have dealt with during these high growth stages?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what Mike was saying, right? I think I had a leader one time tell me it's like a bunch of spinning plates on sticks, and you're trying to keep everyone up at once. And that image was always stuck in my head when that was brought up, and I was just like, it's so true, right? Because I think for me, to very similar to Mike, it was, can you work on our sales force? Can you build our hiring process? Can you build the enablement program? Can you actually close deals with your team, right? And so I think a lot of it just really.
Today.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, oh, and do that just today, because tomorrow's a whole new slew of projects. And so I think it was really coming down to saying, how do you ruthlessly prioritize, stay hyper focused, and make sure that is this the thing that is driving the goal for you in the end, right? And so I think for sales, it's really easy sometimes where it's like, it's revenue, right? And so a lot of time it would align back to the mission of the company of like, does this align with our mission, and does it drive revenue, right? Like those are the first two things I would ask myself, and then I'd be able to organize, prioritize, delegate, or just essentially say, I'm not doing it this week, right? Like this is something that has to be deprioritized, and there's just like learning to say no, right? Because I think the first time I joined a fast growing company, I wanted to look like I was a person that could do everything, and I will tell you that's the fastest way to burnout ever. And so I think I was like maybe 2 months in, and I was like, I don't know if I can rev at this high for even even 6 months, right? And I think it was really having a moment to myself to say, okay, what can you actually take on, and to start expanding that, right? And then to Mike's point as well, is find people that will support you. Nothing needs to be done in a vacuum. Everybody's on the same team. Everybody's trying to hit the same goal.
Do you have, this is something that I personally struggle with, is like, I know that I need to prioritize like revenue, right? Like bookings, wins. What I struggle with is like a framework by which to do this on a regular basis. What are some tactics that you've used, or maybe a framework that you use to make sure that you're making the right decisions on what to prioritize when everything's
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's I always like take a little bit of time every single day to look at the task list that I have. And then I just start adding like, is this high priority, medium priority, low priority, right? And then I just continue doing that with every single task that comes on my plate. And I think it really starts to help prioritize, to say like, if this is high priority and high importance, it's got to be the first thing that I do, right? If it's not, then it really turns into like, how can I delegate this? If it's low priority for me, but high importance, is there somebody else that maybe can do that within my team, and then really be able to up level a lot of my teammates? So a lot of it comes down to very like simple things of just like marking things by priority and importance, and then just checklists, right? Like every single day, it feels so good to just cross something off of a list, where I just started to do like random things as well. Like, did you eat breakfast? Check. Oh, yes, I did. I accomplished something.
I ate.
But
I'm not joking. Like for real. Yeah. Like yesterday, I didn't have lunch.
Right.
It is an accomplishment.
Yeah. It's like, go get coffee, go for a 5-minute walk, right? Like when you look at everything that you've accomplished and all the things that you do in a day, it's actually pretty amazing how much many of us can accomplish.
Thank you so much for that, Jeff. Emily, I think that you also have some really good tactics and strategies for prioritizing time when the fan's spinning and dude is going up.
Yes, very similar to Jeff. It's all about prioritizing until it hurts, right? For me, on Sunday nights, I just look at my week. I'm a huge sticky noter, so it sounds very silly, but I've got sticky notes everywhere. So I really look at my every day of the week, and I really come up with like a priority for the day, and then I come up with a priority for the week. And scratching it off at the end of the week is very similar. For Jeff, I pull the sticky note off my computer. But it just goes back to like, what can I do to move the needle today for my business? What can I do to move the needle this week for my business and for my people? And maybe an example is, right, being a people leader. Hey, by this Friday, I want to listen to 3 gong calls, review them, and make sure I deliver a development plan to this AE. So I think that it takes the mental, scariness out of it by just backing it up and just making the list and writing it down.
Yeah. Sometimes you're like, oh, because oftentimes we're back to back. And then we have maybe like a 45-minute window that is not taken up on your calendar. You're like, what should I do? Right. And then, but if you have these sticky notes or these lists, it's like, oh, I know exactly what I can do right now. Maybe it's have a snack or go for a walk or listen to whatever it might be. It's like, you're not just like fidgeting around, catching a breather, right? I mean, you can do that too, but it's like, you don't have to like think about what it is that you have to do. you know, when so much is at stake, like ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly.
And Emily, I also want to hear from you around like the challenges that you have faced, you know, either at Trip Actions and or HEAP during like these hyper growth stages.
Challenges for me are super similar. So Mike and Jeff called out the largest one. So I love the plate spinning idea. Though Jeff, I call it flying a plane and building it at the same time. But essentially, it's prioritizing until it hurts, right? Just making sure that you are joining revenue generating meetings. I think sometimes companies get really meeting happy and we want to have a meeting for everything. And sometimes you just have to take a step back, and Jeff called this out, and just simply say no or ask for an agenda for the meeting and make sure that you're really joining with the purpose to actually get something done. And the second thing that I'll call out for me, I really believe people work for people. So I really am a people leader, and I believe that figuring out what motivates people. So a huge challenge at Trip Actions, we started so small. When we just started hiring and hiring and hiring, the teams were growing. So much change was coming, right? Like you would get these accounts, and then next week you'd have a different group of accounts. So really you had to manage the change. So I had to get really good at talking about making change sound exciting, making change sound like it was something in their benefit. And I think that it goes down to, similar to what Mike said about that gal and his story, bringing someone on the team to step up and champion the change for you. Show the team that this is exciting and really get them bought in that what we're doing is the right thing. And I think that that took me some time, because the change was changing every morning, every 24 hours, it felt like. So you had to get used to making sure that you could really ground the team around and center them around something positive.
Yeah, I mean, that's really challenging for leadership, right? Because, yeah, of course, the reps and the ICs are experiencing that change, but you are too. And you almost have to pretend like it's fine, no worries. Like you have to make sure that people are bought into the change, even if you're also going through your journey on the change curve, right?
Right.
So thank you for sharing that. And Emily, just to stick on your thread for a second, like during all these experiences and challenges that you faced, was there something that like you were super surprised about, or like you were not expecting, that was perhaps more complicated than you'd imagined, or maybe it was far simpler than you'd imagined? You're like, oh wow, or you're like, oh wow.
I definitely think it's more complicated than it looks, right? But that's almost what makes it truly exciting. So I think building out a territory model at Trip Actions was probably one of the hardest things that I went through. I was a new sales leader. There weren't very many of us, and it took iteration after iteration after iteration. And now, having done it a couple times, I know that that's just how the cookie crumbles, and that's how it works, right? But at the time, it was a lot to learn how to champion it, how to come up with territory plans, how to get the team. I'm a really big outbound leader, so just making sure that they've got their outbound focus. What does that look like in terms of the day-to-day and activity? And so more challenging for sure than I ever thought, but I also think I made the best friends of my career doing it. And it also teaches you to continue to double down on the no ego attitude, which Mike kind of hinted at this earlier of, hey, I would not be where I am today without the sales leaders and the other departments. And you really have to learn to lean in and say, hey, this is the problem at hand. How can we all just put our heads together and just fix it as best we can?
100%. And what was I going to say? The territory planning is definitely, I've done it too. And it's just like the first time that I did it, I was like, oh my God. But it's like, and then I think this goes back to what Mike was saying earlier, like how, like we need to publish this. It needs to go live soon. Like, when is it good enough? When do we have an MVP? Like, was that hard to figure out? Like, okay, this is good enough for now. Like, we'll iterate later as we learn more, but like, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect.
Yeah, I mean, that's extremely challenging, right? And I think that goes back to, you got to find your reps. Jack and Corey were mine at Trip Actions. They're now sales leaders there. Nice. They were my two top AEs, and I would always lean on them. Jack was a Salesforce wizard. I would have him go in there, and I would actually have him talk to the team like, hey, we are rolling this territory plan out. This is why it's exciting, and this is how I'm going to use it. So it stopped coming from me, and it started coming from a place of, hey, I'm a successful AE, and I am your peer, right? And it took me some time to develop a process there.
Yeah, no, that's really, really smart. Mike, what about you? I'd love to hear some of like your biggest surprises, either for, you know, in a positive sense or in a negative sense, that you were like, oh my God, during, you know, your experiences at in Spring Health or otherwise.
Yeah, I would say my biggest surprise, I think, as we were scaling, is the type of account executives that we needed and how to make them successful. Because when I started, I had one really strong AE. She got promoted to manager and she was able to ramp some people. But as we scaled, that wasn't scalable. And so I think like there was AEs that were really strong at CV Insights that wouldn't be successful at Spring and vice versa. So like you really need to understand the type of AE, but then you also, when you're hiring so much, you need to put them in a system where they're going to be successful. And I think that at a company like Spring, it's all about resourcefulness and how can you get answers and get the information you need as things are constantly changing and things aren't going to be as organized as I'd like them to be. And so we really started like changing what we were looking for from even people that were in similar sales or things like that. It's more about, can they handle fast growth and change, and do they embrace that, and do they like that? And that's very different than the AEs I would swear by at other companies.
Yeah, it's like in a startup, in a high growth startup, like the ability to just figure it out and without complaining about it, it's like, hey, like I'm busy, or like I don't even know myself. Can you ask so and so and so? Like just figure it out and let me know what they say. That like scrappiness versus being hyper polished, right?
Exactly.
It's like being polished is also wonderful, but it's like maybe for a different type of organization, a different type of sales team, right?
Exactly. And we talk about that, and we train the AEs early on, like earlier in my sales career, kind of like what Jeff was talking about. You want to do everything for everyone. You want to be the most responsive. You want to take it all on. Now, there's times when if I help an AE with something, they'll come to me all the time for it. And now I'll either tell them to go somewhere else, or sometimes it's amazing. I'll get a Slack in the morning and I could respond to it, but I don't. And then when I check in on it that evening or whenever it is, they figured it out. And so you really got to not be everything for everyone, and focus on the right things, and the right AEs will figure it out.
Yeah. And it's, you know, at my previous job at Flock, this was something that my boss told me. He was like, Milena, what I need you to do is figure out problems at the peer level, figure it out with your peers first. If that fails, then come to me, because if you always come to me, I'm going to be a bottleneck, not just for you, but for everybody else, right? Because he's dealing with a bunch of stuff that I'm not as privy to, right? So that's where I really learned, like, you know what, like going to my immediate manager is going to be like my third attempt at solving something. I'm going to try plan A, B, and then C is like going to like the potential bottleneck, right? When it's like, hey, I tried all these things and like I'm still stuck.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, I used to do something with Mike as well, where I have to rep, you know, they always come for like questions or like validation. And so a lot of times I would just put it back on them when a Slack would come or an email would come, and I would just say, what would you do if you were in my position? Right. And it would be awesome to see the strategies or the creative ideas that they come. And then, you know, for me, it's like, I actually never would have thought of that. That's awesome. You should run with it and see. And I think it goes back to, you know, really empowering your team to, it's okay to fail, right? Because I think all of us in this room have failed many times. And so we're almost trying to teach people like failure is okay, right? As long as you learn from it, pick yourself back up and go. And I think that's when you can empower your team to do that, it stops turning into this like, oh, let me go to my small senior leader and ask them for validation or approval. Though sometimes just do it. And then just like the outcome is pretty amazing.
It's so amazing. And then I think when that kind of thing happens, Jeff, when it's like, hey, you know, when they reply back to you, when you ask, hey, if you're in my position, what would you do? And they reply with something super insightful. That's the kind of thing that you want to like blast out to the whole team to display that this is the kind of behavior that we expect. And perhaps like with a little bit of coaching in there too. It's like, hey, I want everybody, like before coming to me, I want you all to answer this question to yourselves first, right? And then you can then maybe Mike, when you hire for somebody that is like a go-getter and they can figure things out on their own, this is also a mechanism by which to teach that and to ingrain it in the culture, right? So it's even if you hire for that, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't, but you can try to teach it as well. So Jeff, that's really wonderful that happened to you. There's actually, we're going to go a little bit off track here because we have a question from the audience. And this question is for Emily regarding territory planning. And, we're on since time is so limited in high growth startups, so we can help Danielle with, not spending time reinventing the wheel with territory planning. So she wants to know, what reports in Salesforce do you use to help manage your territory? Or what information is most crucial for helping you and your team manage your business?
Great question. It was different at Heath and Traction. So I think it obviously depends on the company you're working for. But ultimately, it comes down to where I've had success, at least, is I'm working with your RevOps team. They're a huge partner to sales leaders, and really identifying what are your key accounts. So whether you call them tier A's, tier 1s, we call them at Heath, really identifying that top portion of accounts for each AE and what that looks like, and making sure it's fair-ish across the team, that each AE has the right amount of top-tier accounts, and then understanding what the rest are. And then, so we've got a Salesforce report that they can easily understand what tier for each account that they've got, so they can understand what plan they have to go after those accounts and outbound into them is the first thing. The second thing for the AE, I think it's important for them to have a strategic plan. So once again, I'm a huge proponent of outbound and having outbound plans. And I think for an AE, you've got to have strategy. So for us at Heath, they usually touch anywhere between 10 and 12 accounts weekly. And you can't just go after only whales, right? It's going to take months to land a meeting with outreach, for example. But if you go after a smaller company that's a little lower hanging fruit at the same time in your weekly strategy, then you likely are going to find some low hanging fruit. And then eventually you'll start getting some of these whales or larger accounts. So I think those all go in tandem, but ultimately it's the crux of your RevOps team and working really partnering pretty close with them.
Yeah, that's critical.
I don't know, Jeff or Mike, if you have anything else to add.
I think you nailed it, Emily.
Awesome. And then we have another really great question from the audience that I think is actually super related to our topic today. So, this question can be for anybody. But this question is from Ash. In high growth environments, what are some of the most common sales coaching issues that you see, right? And then relatedly, what do you use to onboard salespeople? So I'd love to actually answer the first question first, which is what are some of the most common sales coaching issues that you guys face in these high growth environments?
I think I can go on that one. I think for me, what was the most common thing that I found is just consistency between every single rep. I remember I had an issue at one of my companies when I was like, oh, I have some time this week. I'm going to get to listen to a bunch of calls. I did it, and the value statement and the value prop that was said by every rep was different. Nobody actually said what our company did the same. And I was like, that is a massive issue, right? And so I think it was just going back to the drawing board. I was like, we're just not doing enough coaching in general, right? And just, I think I was a little naive where, I had hired them, I had done all the work, onboarding and so forth. So I just felt like, okay, everybody's good, everyone can sell now. But I think it's a consistent coaching that is needed, right? Even any athlete in a professional team is practicing almost every single week the same things that they've been doing all their life, right? Because they're still trying to master that. And I think it's the same thing with a lot of the reps that I've helped coach over time, and really being creating that consistent messaging, right? So every single week I spend an hour of time going over one of the skill sets or one of the characteristics that we're looking for, or about one of our products, to making sure that everybody's saying it the same consistently together as a team. And then from there, you can morph it based on, skills and characteristics and personalities and so forth. That kind of gives every rep their own voice of how they sell. But I think coming just back to the basics of, what makes really good, salespeople, good discovery, good negotiation skills, objection handling, agenda setting, right? I think all of that is really important.
So it sounds like once you realize this inconsistency, then you had 1 hour coaching sessions with the reps. And was this in a virtual setting or face to face?
It's been both, right? And so like today at WeMaps, it's a virtual setting. So I have such a large team. I think it's even harder sometimes. And so like, I think it's putting them kind of in real world scenarios as well. So I try to mimic as much as I can a real sales call. So like a lot of it is virtual today, but we do a lot of in-person visits as well. And so, I've flown reps into, the HQ here in LA, and I'm like, we're just going to play like you're coming into a dispensary, right, of one of the business owners, and you're just trying to catch them, right? Like, give me your 30-second elevator pitch for me to sit down, right? Like it's really just putting them in as many scenarios as that you would find, because I think it's just more practice, and then they become like really familiar with that. So when they're in that scenario again, without you listening to them or coaching, you're really confident that they're going to be able to go through it.
Yeah, I love role playing for this purpose. It's the best. And I remember at SalesLoft, our VP of sales would always this was before COVID, so we were all in the office, and he'd come up to a random AE or SDR and be like, "Hey, we use Yesware, like a competitor. Like, we use a competitor. Go." And you could be like getting coffee in the kitchen. It's like, do you love it? So it was really funny. Mike and Emily, do you guys have any insights regarding like the most common sales coaching issues that you guys face in high growth environments?
For me, I totally agree with everything Jeff said. The only thing that I would add, which Jeff did say, is he focuses on one thing for an hour. I think everything can always feel like it's on fire, especially for an account executive. So for me, I really try to rein it back, right? Like, we could easily say, for me, like, I'm sucking at everything, right? But I've got to prioritize again until it hurts. And so it goes back to my sticky notes. But when I think about developing my AEs and my leaders, I try and take a step back and prioritize one or two things in the conversation and not get overwhelmed with where the conversation can go with all of the things that we can feel like we're currently sucking at.
That's really smart. Also, by the way, can you please send us a picture of your sticky notes after this? I'm so curious to see.
Of course.
Mike, anything you want to add?
I find when you onboard new AEs, they all have different experiences. And so they want to reinvent the wheel, which I'm fine with people, AEs, making us better and changing things. But first, you got to learn like the Spring Health way to learn the basics before you change anything. So like the reps that have been here a while, I trust they can improvise and do what they want. But I always tell people, first learn the Spring Health way, pass the certifications, do it the way you're supposed to, and then come and identify better ways to do things and all of that. Because some new hires are so eager to make a difference and come with suggestions and all of that, but they're setting themselves back. And then the other thing I find is the solution itself, like most AEs, at least we hire, like, are not straight out of school. They can run a discovery call. Of course, they can always improve and do better. You can learn the solution, the demo, all of that, but there's so much more to the sale than that. And so I do exercises of like having them go find answers to things, or listen to calls and ask and identify what were the questions that came up and what are the answers to them and things like that. Because at least for our sale, the demo is 10% of the sale. So people harp so much on that when there's so much more that you need to do to be successful.
I've seen that too. Reps want to nail the demo. They want to nail the product. And it's like, you know what, that will come. What's harder is nailing discovery. What's harder is advancing the deal and project managing a deal. Like, that's hard. Objection handling. Like those are like more of the foundations that like we should be really intentionally trying to improve at, because the product stuff it'll just come like by osmosis. And then we have another question that actually dovetails nicely into what you were talking about, Mike, which is around, it's a question from Simon. And he's talking about leading indicators and for SDRs that are ramping, right? So we're talking about like new hires when they start. So what are some really key leading indicators that you watch for SDRs and AEs during their ramp period?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, for us, it's about pipeline, like, and how quickly they're able to generate pipeline and how quickly they're able to progress pipeline. some of it is anecdotal, like how did they do in their mocks and like how are they scoring and things like that. But I always find like the first deal is a vanity metric. Anybody can get their first deal. I get more excited when somebody closes their third deal because that shows that it's not a fluke, but that's not really a leading indicator. I think it's the pipeline that they've generated and how it's progressing. And you can track all of that in Atrium, not to plug Atrium just to plug it, but you can easily see those types of metrics in Atrium.
Thanks, Mike. We did not bribe Mike to say that. Just saying. Hey, and Emily, I want to hear from you actually, because you mentioned earlier that you were big on outbound. I am too. So what are some of the leading indicators that you look at in a hyper growth environment for your ramping AEs? Or if, I don't know if SDRs roll up to you, but.
No, so for no SDRs, so just AEs, but for me, Trip Actions and Heap, it comes down to a territory plan for each AE. So what does it look like? What is the plan? Like, right, what are your metrics for the week? Are you hitting 100 calls? Are you doing X amount of emails? And the particular thing to Heap, so Heap, it's a more technical sale. So are you hitting the right personas? Are you hitting a company that actually we could actually speak to the value proposition that we have, where Trip Actions was almost, you could sell it to any organization. So it was about prioritizing, right? Like I could go after 1,000 accounts, but which are the ones that you're going to prioritize for the week and what's the why? So I think it comes down to the sales management of holding them accountable for their plans weekly and just inspecting them, and then holding the team accountable to some form of metrics. And granted, I do believe that people are different in how they outbound. I think that there's not a one size fits all in terms of outbound success. So I like to make sure that I provide a safe space where people can actually speak to their successes, right? Like Jeff might see great success doing LinkedIn videos, and Nate might see a ton of success from cold calling. So how can I get the two of them together and really coach the team? So it goes back to just leaning on the team and having them really learn and grow from each other.
And Emily, side question, because Chris asked to you, and you mentioned territory planning. So just really quick, do you find it best to do territory plans based on geography or industry, or do you use both?
I've used both at both companies. Once again, I truly think it goes back to your RevOps person and letting them run the data and then bring the data back to the sales team and sales managers, I should say. And then we just like look at it and dive in it together. But most often I think it is by geo and industry.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be. Yeah, I was going to say sometimes it can be both. Sometimes, I've done it where it's over time. It's actually we had to segment it even more based off of how fast we're growing or the niche industries that we were working with. I think I had one company that I was with startup, which was a manufacturing company. And we did what I found really quickly was like, we're really good in like the aerospace industry. So people like SpaceX who are building rockets, right? Like we just knew that we could build parts for them really quickly. But then, I was seeing this other revenue grow really, really fast. And I was like, I don't even know what this is. And it turned out to be the semiconductor industry. What I found out really quickly was I need to segment this immediately because the discovery questions and the things that we talk about were very different, right? So you could have two reps and already start segmenting into very specific industries. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it may take a little bit longer depending on where you're seeing growth, right? But I think that's where it's going to be really important as a leader, and especially a sales leader, to understand like where do we do really, really well, right? And then where can we continue growing? Because I think sometimes, especially with industries that are growing really fast, it's really easy to say like, well, we can do everything, so let's just sell to everybody. But then that's kind of you just kind of lose focus. It's like the carpet bomb method. Whereas you got to be sometimes really pinpointed because your resources are limited sometimes, right? And the people you have and the time they have is limited. So it's like, how do I maximize, revenue, maximize everything that I can do with the little resources that I have?
It's almost like what you're saying earlier about like saying no. We don't have to do everything. Mm-hmm. Actually, this. Mike.
I was just going to say, in terms of territories and segmentation, Emily hit on this, which was it depends so much on your business. Like at CB Insights, everyone was an inside sales rep, so we were able to just take a score based on industry, based on location, based on number of employees, and from there they would all just have a score, and then we would divvy them up based on different things. At Spring, in person matters a lot more, so geo is a much bigger factor. So things like that matter, but kind of what Jeff hit on is don't segment just to segment. Have a reason to do it. If there should be some sort of different motion or different training or different offering that you're giving to them to have a reason to segment. If not, just give everyone accounts because I think companies try to, like, when I saw at CV Insights, we got stricter and stricter over time as we needed to, but don't over segment too early before there's really a need to. But also, as Jeff said, as you're selling to everyone, you're selling to no one.
It's like all the things that we were talking about, like prioritizing and saying no. And it's like, it sounds like it's true for not just like leadership, but also like things like territory planning, right? So with that said, actually, I wanna go to our last question here, which is around, you know, what are some of the skills that you were forced to develop when you're in these very high growth situations where everything is on fire? You're like, oh my God, like if I don't develop this skill, like I'm not going to be successful. My team's not going to be successful.
I can go first. So for me, we've hit on this a lot. Prioritize still hurts, I think, is we've nailed that coffin down. But something else I'll add is communication. I think is imperative. How you communicate with your team, how you communicate with the other areas of the org, right? Like the marketing team, the product team, the CS team, right? Like what does that look like, and how are you leaning in? And I think the other thing is just slow down, and it might be hard, right? Everything is on fire, but you really are meeting people that are it's going to be everlasting relationships that you'll take with for the rest of your career. And sometimes I think that's hard to do.
Yeah. Just remember to like, stop just even for a minute. That's really helpful. Thank you, Emily. Jeff, what about you? What are some skills that you were forced to learn?
I always go back to, like, I just say document everything. It's so funny because I remember as a kid, my dad used to say, write it down because you're going to forget, right? Or somebody's going to remember that. And I was always be like, just old man wisdom. I don't even listen to it. And now I say it all the time to everyone I know. I'm like, write it down, right? Because I think like that's how you scale really quickly, because otherwise it turns into this like tribal knowledge where only like a couple people know how to do something really well, right? But it's like you need everybody, again, to kind of the sales coaching methodology, you need everyone to be able to do the same thing, right? And have a really solid foundation. So I was not much of a writer growing up, but I was like, man, I've gotten really good at like getting really succinct in my communication in documents, process, and so forth, because you never know when you're going to run into that again. And then it's really easy to change to say like, hey, when something happens, what do? You give them the document, and it allows you to scale really fast, right? And so a lot of times the leaders that I have today will rep will ask them something, and they'll be like, did you check the document for it? And the rep goes, oh yeah, that's right. I need to do that first. And then I'll come and ask you that question. And again, you're just coaching that habit really, really fast, right? And then I think lastly, to Emily's point, is the cross collaboration and communication. There's no way I would be as successful as I was without like leaning on all of the people on the team, especially in different departments. I think it comes away from like not doing things in a vacuum. I think for me, it was very much like I was hired to do this, so therefore it's my job, right? But what I don't think I started to realize really quickly is like kind of the trickle down effect. How does this affect another person in another department? Because I remember one time I had created a new Salesforce process, and I was like, it's so easy for the salespeople now to be able to close won opportunities. What I didn't know that it just completely screwed over my finance team, where they're like, I don't know how to track this anymore, or invoice it, right? And it was just one of those, me doing it in a vacuum, not asking for help, not asking for feedback on that. And so it was a really, really big learning lesson of like, hey, I'm working on something. Would you be able to help me? Or could you just give me a feedback and take a look at it real quick? Which I think is going to allow you to move faster and allow you to kind of get to that, 80%. Doesn't need to be perfect. We'll iterate real quickly, but it allows you to get that feedback a lot quicker so that you can iterate.
I love that. Yeah. It's like, so you mentioned document everything, right? Because it'll empower you to scale faster. Kind of like what Mike, your rep did this for the implementations process, right? And it's like, it catapulted not just the performance of the team, but also her career, like amazing. And then Jeff, you said also something really interesting, which is, I think I like to call this like corporate citizenship, right? It's like, make sure that whoever is a stakeholder in whatever project you do is at least aware, at least. And maybe they have a bigger role to play, but they're at least aware of what's going on, because you don't want to break something that they might be using at the benefit of somebody else. And of course, there's no ill intent, but it's, you have to keep those things in mind as you scale.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something? Sorry, Jeff. I didn't.
No, I was just going to say, I remember I think growing up as a rep, I'd always see these people that were like the executives, and they just like, everybody knows them and everybody likes working with them. And I was like, how do they do that? Right? Like, how did they become that person? I think I quickly realized you can become that person if you over communicate, document, you cross collaborate really quickly, because then people look at you as a team player, right? You're like, wow, this is a great partner, and this is someone I always want to partner with. And then you'll find that it actually just opens up more opportunities and responsibilities, because people will have you in mind. They'll say, oh, Jeff's really good at this, or Emily or Mike is really good at this because I've worked with them before.
I love that. Mike, what about you? Last but not least, what are some skills that you were forced to learn to thrive in a hyper growth environment?
There's a few that were brought up. We talked about delegation, which is so important, and you really need to flex that muscle more and more. Then also building relationships cross-departmentally is so critical, and communication and having outlets of how to communicate with different teams and looping them in. So those ones were hit on. I think the thing that I've had to develop more at Spring than I have anywhere else is getting people to focus on the right things. So if one AE has a deal where they're having a challenge with one of our partners and there's a lot of complexities there, that they're going to raise it up the flag and it's going to become an issue. And it's not that what they're dealing with isn't real. It's that there's bigger things to focus on than that. And you got to get them not harping or going down a rabbit hole on this one thing. And so I've really learned to talk people through and ask questions to get them to realize that this isn't where they should be focusing on. And that's a skill of like asking questions and leading them to where you want to go, because I'm good for myself at knowing what I need to focus on, but also AEs need to understand if one small thing changed on one of our offerings, yes, that's annoying and they should have known about that. But if they're going to spend all day figuring it out when it was only relevant for one thing and it's not really that applicable to other prospects, then they're not spending their time wisely. And so training the team on that has been a skill that I've really had to develop.
So training the team to focus on the needle movers, not the 1%, like not the question that's going to impact like 1% of the deals or less than that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Emily, Jeff, and Mike. My internet is unstable. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. It was lovely to learn from you. And I'm so excited to see a picture of Emily's Post-it notes. And thank you all to all of you guys. I feel better equipped to lead a team through a hyper growth stage. And with that, Eduardo, the floor is yours.
Wow, that was really fantastic. Milena, Jeff, Mike, and Emily, you are great. I don't know if everything is on fire, but this panel was fire. We are ready to continue this day. For the audience, I have exciting news for you. Our next panel, if you like this one, you're going to love the next one too. It's a fireside chat with Pete Kazenji and Manny Medina about scaling outreach. The king of sales engagement discusses the future of the category. And I have to say, we have the best audience. Thank you, audience, for all the questions. Thank you for participating with us. I will see you in the next panel. And while the panelists and I will hang out, we will hang out backstage. The MSP team will make sure that the recording will be available in the MSP website. So panelists, we can go backstage and wait for the next session. I'll see you later, audience.